let's go ahead and kick off with a discussion of martial archetypes and orient ourselves to working with Mars. Again, my name is Whitney Hill, and I've been studying and practicing Hellenistic astrology for almost 6 years now, so since 2019. I'm a Cancer rising with Mars in Aries in the 10th house, so of course I had to bring in the classical delineation and become a blacksmith as well. I'm also studying for a master's in cultural astronomy and astrology. I'm an author, I do marketing, so these are some things that you'll see come out in my work. If you would like to tag me in anything, I'm on Instagram and Threads as Cobra and Crescent, Blue Sky now as well. I'm not so much on Twitter anymore, but Cobra_Crescent. I'll be speaking for about 20 minutes about who Mars is and assessing Mars and some thoughts on working with Mars. You're welcome to live tweet anything you see, but just please tag me. And before we get started, just a reminder to pace yourself. So again, like this is Mars, it covers a lot of difficult and potentially uncomfortable topics. I'm not planning to delve into those very deeply, but just as a reminder, if you do need to step away, please go ahead and do that. Like Saturn, Mars can be a planet of extremes and too muchness in a way that can be, kind of fast or acute. So nobody will feel bad if you need to step away and take care of your nervous system and your heart. So who is Mars? While we all may have our own personal experiences, interpretations, and gnosis, there's some basics that define any given planet. And as we prepare to go into this Leo Cancer retrograde, it's worth going back to basics to see how the martial archetype might play through, this cycle. So in Hellenistic and medieval Islamic astrology, Mars is considered a malefic. And there's no value judgment attached to that. It's not bad, it's not evil. It's more about asking the question, is this conducive to life? As we look at Mars, excessive heat and dryness can, suck needed moisture out of life. And it can also drive passionate behavior, which, as Ali Lomi has said, that word passion used to be taken with a more negative connotation than it is now. So it can be, again, that sense of excess. So as we think about Mars, thinking about heat in the sense of not just fire and burning, but also inflammation, fever, hot tempers, or professions using heat and things that must be heated. So chefs or blacksmiths are some different ways that we might see the martial come through. But again, we can also see it in how we treat the world, with climate change, heat waves, ocean warming. And there we see that kind of sense of the martial excess not really being conducive to life. Mars is also about dryness. So dryness as in drought, as in irritation and itchiness. But if we think about it conceptually, it's about separation. For things to come together, they really need to have moisture. They need to have something binding them. They need kind of a Venusian sense of connectivity and connectedness. And we don't have that with Mars. So we might see greater separation when we think about the martial. Mars is also sharpness. So sharp as in edged tools and the work that's done with them, like surgery and butchery. It can be things like slicing, cutting, penetrating, or severing, and the fallout of sharps, like blood. But if we think about it, again, conceptually, it could also be the sense of something acute or fast or sudden. Mars is also action. So action not only is in movement, but also in decisiveness and conviction, making that decision to take an action or having the courage to step forward and act with conviction. And this might be more particular for the fire Mars placements, but this idea of being equals doing. What you do is what you are. And that can kind of bleed into our work in a way that can potentially drive burnout or overwork if we're not careful. So with these different aspects of martial nature, we're looking at how those are tempered, modified, or exacerbated in a chart. And I'm speaking particularly about natal charts here. And you'll see on the screen that I have potentially constructive and potentially destructive, because I think there's two faces to any planet. And I say potentially here because you can have too much of either. But if we're looking at things like, assertion or aggression, these can be two sides of the same coin. So looking at how, again, the factors of the natal chart are encouraging one expression over another, and how we might want to address that as Mars goes through different signs or goes into retrograde, is always going to be a key part of working with Mars. And a quick note on self-sovereignty in particular, just remembering that the sun exalts in the sign of Mars in Aries, and that the planet Aldebaran is of the nature of Mars. And for me, sovereignty is a key part of integrity. So as we're thinking about, what does it look like to have self-sovereignty or to act with sovereignty, particularly perhaps in the Leo section of the transit, that'll be a place to explore maybe different approaches to Mars. So who Mars is not. Mars is not an excuse for bad behavior. And I say that again as someone with Mars in Aries on the 10th. There are quite a few things that I've gotten into. I can't blame Mars for those things. And I know it's a thing that we do in the astrological community, where we say, oh, I'm like that because of, this placement. Or we look at someone else, sometimes negatively, and say, oh, well, that's why they're like that. And I understand that we do that as astrological shorthand. We're all professionals in a field together. We have a way of speaking. But I have concerns that we don't always consider the abdication of responsibility that those kind of statements can entail. So as we're talking about Mars and we're thinking about the way it impacts us and others, I do want to encourage that thinking around, am I being responsible about how I approach this powerful energy that is Mars? There's also a saying that the stars incline, they do not compel, which I've explored in an essay comparing Valens and Abu Mashar. But the gist of it is that astrology offers a gift to assess, understand, and direct our inclinations, and that includes the martial, just because it has a possibility to manifest as too much heat, too much dryness, too much sharpness, too much action. That does not mean that we are forced to act towards those extremes. So let's look at assessing Mars, because base planetary nature is always going to be heavily influenced and modified by the circumstances it is found in. There's kind of a lot here, but the point is that deeper assessments are adding nuance to any chart. But again, I'm speaking specifically to natal charts here. So while we're investigating, we want to think about those investigative questions. Who, what, when, where, and why. The when part obviously comes in via timing and activation, but the why will be a blend of all of these. So as we're looking at Mars, we can look by sign and say, who is this Mars? We can look by aspect and say, what is Mars interacting with and how? Or if you have a more relational approach, who is Mars interacting with? And we can look by place or by house. Where is Mars acting? And you'll see that I have some things in blue on there. Those are a little bit more advanced. They're not really necessary to having like a good basic understanding, but they're things that I find add a lot of that underlying nuance. And you'll notice also that the Dodecatomori and a lot of courage are listed under all three of them. And that's because as we're like digging down into those deeper layers, we can look at different things related to those points. So as we're looking at sign, does the Dodecatomori of Mars gain or lose dignity? Are these underlying actions supported? We can look at aspect. Can Mars see those points? We can look at place. How is Mars's natal placement being changed or modified by, for example, the Dodecatomori? And then with fixed stars, just because everybody always asks about orbs with fixed stars, I use very tight ones, usually no more than 2 degrees. If you don't already know whether or not you have a fixed star in Paran with Mars, you can check astro.com. So pulling all that together, the big question as you approach Mars in your life and for this upcoming Leo Cancer retrograde is, what does this Mars want to do? So let's talk about working with Mars. And this is when the timing aspect that when we mentioned before is going to be key. So thinking about activation as a major factor is going to help figure out if you even really need to worry about this retrograde, because I know that like astrologers start talking about, oh, such and such planet is going retrograde, and everybody on social media goes, oh no, what's going to happen? And a lot of times that's not even something that an individual personally needs to worry about. So following Abu Mashar, we want to consider the root, which is the natal chart, speaking to the possibilities encompassed within an individual's life. We want to look at the perfection or the terminal point and say, what is the major focus for this year? And if you want to break it down further by month. And then the revolution, the solar return, and say how those possibilities are modified with each slice of year of life. So thinking about the root, is Mars prominent in your chart generally? Again, mine is in the 10th house. It's always there. If you have it in a cadent house or a house that's not aspecting the ascendant by a traditional aspect, it might not be so prominent for you and appear in other ways. Is it being activated by perfection and any fixed stars being activated with it? And then thinking also about how the condition is changing in the solar return. So with all of this in mind, pulling it together, how, if at all, is Mars being activated in your natal chart during this upcoming retrograde from Leo to Cancer in December 2024 to February 2025? Taking it further, if you have a birthday during that period, is there a shift in focus toward or away from Mars? The retrograde is so, it's not a Mercury retrograde. It's not 3 weeks, it's a few months. So if you have a birthday in that time, you may find that the importance of the retrograde shifts. Also checking to see if Mars is activated in any monthly returns or as master of the revolution for that given solar return. So again, thinking about, those investigative questions and seeing, is Mars even something you need to worry about, can help be a way to manage the approach to the upcoming retrograde. So if there's any planet that can consciously or can benefit from consciously being given a job, in my opinion, it is Mars. And that is one way that I like to look at dealing with difficult transits. I'm going to say, take all of this with a grain of salt. It is something that needs to be approached on a case-by-case and personal basis. If you're not, really familiar with a martial, it can help to engage with an astrologer who is, and especially an astrologer who does your mediation. But that being said, these are some kind of high-level ideas to get started with. So channel the martial. Mars likes to do certain things. Those are generally related to something that is hot, dry, sharp, or active, as I started with. Looking at strengths. So this is a planet where it can be beneficial to focus on strengths rather than trying to grind away and improve weaknesses. There's probably less patience with the Mars placement than there is with other placements like Saturn, and forcing, this improvement of something that you're maybe not great at or that you don't enjoy can bring out potentially some of those more difficult consequences of heat, dryness, sharpness, and action. So think about if you're, really slogging away at something and you're not getting anywhere, and that can lead to a form of burnout. That's not something that we want. So setting limits is going to be another key part of navigating Mars and working with the martial. And how you do that is going to be dependent on your Mars. Venus is the usual recommendation, bringing the Venusian into your life, just because it is the lesser benefic, the other half of the pair of the lesser malefic and benefic. Personally, I prefer to balance my Mars with my Pisces Jupiter just because of what's going on in my natal chart. And this is why, again, it's important to, if you're not, already familiar and comfortable with your chart, it's important to have those conversations with an astrologer who is and who's familiar with remediation. I am just going to leave remediate and mitigate there because it is such a personal thing, chart by chart, and I don't want to offer somebody advice that may not fit with their chart. But there are definitely astrologers who are very experienced in offering that advice. Another piece of advice I have is to know your Mars's troublemakers. So Mars isn't in a vacuum in the natal chart. The ruler of the sign it's in or the planets it's aspecting also have an influence here. This is not it's not an exhaustive list. It's not meant to be taken completely seriously. I'm trying to have a little bit of fun here. But it's a few examples of how to think about planets influencing Mars. Based on delineations from Firmicus and Valens. So understanding those influences on Mars, not only in the natal chart, but also in the solar return chart, can help figure out how that energy might be expressed and where there might be pitfalls. It could look something like this, or it could look the opposite, because again, we're going into a retrograde. So when Mars is in retrograde, consider the root nature of your Mars, and then consider what that might look like when it's reversed, or when it's under stress, or when it's in an unfamiliar situation. So I'm going to touch really briefly on the Leo Cancer retrograde, very broadly and archetypally, because Jessica's presentation is going to have so many more specifics for you, and go much deeper on the particular cycle. But one thing we can look at is thinking about the themes. And Mars as potentially a warrior archetype doing battle in the places of the sky's sovereigns, where Leo can be about, pride in oneself, spotlights, or this kind of study-focused intensity, and Cancer's, leaning more toward caring for oneself and provisions. And this can be like more of a nurturing kind of thing, but that does not have to mean mothering. I just want to put that out there. But also thinking about reflections, how we reflect on ourselves and others, and then initiating change. So thinking about how the retrograde can impact those ideas, and also bring in the considerations of the Aries and Scorpio parts of your chart into the Leo and Cancer areas. Part of this retrograde will be looking for places of excess pain or inflammation. So we often look at Jupiter as a planet of, too much when it goes out of control, or it's, having difficulty in the chart. But harmful excess can really be a hallmark of malefics. And we think about heat and pain and inflammation, maybe potentially, especially in the body, or in the mind or in the emotions, that can be an indicator that something's not right. So taking a minute to pause and taking advantage of the retrograde to say, where am I getting heated? Where am I experiencing inflamed passions? Thinking about where you may be experiencing discomfort. Thinking about where you're feeling hurt, especially to your pride for Leo, to your feelings, or to your body for Cancer. And then also thinking about where you're feeling exhausted, resentful, or overdrawn from doing too much. Because again, we're looking at the places of the sky's sovereigns. And what do sovereigns do? They manage, they direct, they rule. And when we're put Mars in the position of doing those things, and we put that kind of nature of action there, we can find ourselves doing too much. So it could be a good time to consider what benefits from being reduced in your life, what benefits from being separated from your life, what benefits from being cauterized, heated and sealed. What would benefit from being melted down and used in a different way to a different purpose? Or what would benefit from being lanced to allow some poisons to drain? Or we can say a little bit more constructively, look at ways to evaluate your sovereignty, exercise your courage, practice assertiveness, review decisions, or assess whether the actions you've been taking are the correct ones, using the correct amount of effort or force. And that goes for both strong Mars and Mars in more challenging positions. The stronger Mars might need to say, "Oh, I've been going a little bit too hard." A more challenged Mars might be able to say, "Oh, I haven't been using my effort in the correct way, or in a way that benefits me rather than burning me out." Or we could just do less. Mars retrograde might just mean that there's no more gas in the tank. If the natural action of this planet is doing or moving or action, the retrograde might have to be about not doing. So take this as permission to do less. But also consider people who are indicated by Mars, because again, it may not be you who is affected by any given Mars transit, whether Mars is direct or retrograde. It may well be somebody who has a profession indicated by Mars, or somebody who is represented by the house that Mars rules in your chart, or a martial person who just has that kind of aspect in your life. Could be body parts ruled by Leo and Cancer. Could be topics of derived houses that come up. I particularly like looking at the houses derived from fortune. So for example, the last Mars and Leo transit we had, that is my 6th house from fortune. I got bit by fire ants all over. So it may not be quite so literal. But if you're struggling to see where Mars is coming through in your natal chart, those derived houses can definitely be a place to look. So to wrap up, preparing for that upcoming retrograde starts with, investigating the Martial in your life, in your natal chart, understanding how those Martial characteristics are modified or how they're expressed for you in your life. Always remember that there are multiple ways that things can play out. Sometimes we need the more challenging things that Mars offers to fight our way through a difficult time. And sometimes we need to tell Mars to just, put the sword down for a little bit and take a nap. So however Mars is coming through for you, I hope that this has been helpful. Thank you so much for your attention. If you would like to talk more about Mars in your natal chart, I do have a special reading for it. People who have attended this talk can use discount code Sanguine through December 14th to get 20% off. You can also sign up for my newsletter to get monthly transit notes, or if you're looking to do more in-depth learning, I offer some articles in my IBIS nest. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and hand over to Caleb.